At the beginning of the 16th century, what the Portuguese possessed in the Indian Ocean was a highly diverse and discontinuous collection of urban centers, fortresses, trading posts, and other forms of control intended to secure domination over navigation and commerce, domains that the Portuguese kings claimed as their own by right of conquest. This network of strategically located sites, each with varying statuses across a vast geographical area, has often been described by historians as a network or nebula, concepts that in fact had several precedents in the region. It bore little resemblance to the broad territorial dominion typical of European models, or of those established by European monarchies in the Americas. It may seem paradoxical, then, that such a dispersed collection of support points was overseen by a governor, often bearing the title of viceroy, with nearly sovereign powers in theory. Over the course of the latter half of the 16th century, this ensemble gradually came to be seen as having a kind of capital and became commonly known as the State of India. The Portuguese Crown appointed a commander with both political and military authority. To lend this role a distinctive status, the Castilian title of viceroy was eventually adopted. Initially, however, the first viceroy, Dom Francisco de Almeida, had only been appointed as governor by King Manuel. His royal instructions outlined the specific conditions under which he might be promoted to viceroy, conditions that were only met during a particularly delicate phase in negotiations with local rulers. In fact, it wasn't until the second half of the 16th century that governors were routinely granted the title of viceroy from the outset, although they generally exercised the full range of powers associated with it in a similar vein, particularly because governors needed to travel frequently among the various sites of Portuguese presence. Goa only came to be defined as the center of government around 1530. Over time, however, it gradually took on symbolic centrality and developed political and administrative structures that mirrored those of Lisbon, the capital of the kingdom. Institutions such as the Casa dos Contos, the Treasury, the High Court, Relação, an archbishopric, and the Inquisition were all eventually established in Goa, solidifying its status as the administrative heart of Portuguese operations in the East. It was also around this period, especially following the publication of the Third Decade of Asia by chronicler João de Barros in 1563, that the term State of India, Estado da India, began to be used to describe the territories under the authority of the Governor-General. Still, the expression only gained full official status after 1581. This designation can be misleading, although the word state, Estado, could imply lands under the dominion of a ruler or prince. That was just one of many meanings at the time, hardly the most common. Generally, the term referred to territories sharing the same legal or administrative jurisdiction, and thus should not be confused with the modern understanding of the word state. In summary, the governors or viceroys who headed the so-called State of India during the 16th century did not wield absolute sovereign power over a large continuous territory, despite the institutional and symbolic trappings that surrounded them. Their authority was mainly military and extended over various strategic strongholds, such as the roughly dozen fortresses under Portuguese control by 1521, and was minimal or non-existent in many other locations where Portuguese presence stemmed from private ventures and took diverse forms. These zones of influence stretched across much of the east and along the eastern coast of Africa, reaching as far as Mozambique Island and the region of the Zambezi River, the rivers of Sena. However, in these places, as in most areas under Portuguese influence, there were no municipal councils like the one in Goa, where the elite nobility of the kingdom held sway. In contrast, places like Macau were governed by a senate that, for most of the colonial period, represented the local community of merchants, and saw minimal interference from the crown, at least until the end of the 18th century. In some areas, local populations went so far as to establish misericordias, charitable brotherhoods, that operated without needing royal approval, and, in certain respects, functioned in place of municipal governments until the 18th century. Evangelization efforts in parts of Asia, initiated independently of the Crown, led to the formation of community-run settlements where missionaries organized confraternities of catechumens, as seen in Japan and China. Other territories, such as Timor, fell under the control of religious orders, which governed them with little to no accountability to the Portuguese monarchy. In many cases, the legal or political status of these territories was shaped by the nature of their acquisition, but even this lacked consistency. For example, although Ormuz was conquered like Goa or Malacca, its local ruler accepted Portuguese sovereignty and became a vassal king. In other instances, regional rulers signed treaties ceding territories to the Portuguese under full sovereignty, as in the case of Bassein. Some lands, such as parts of Ceylon, were bequeathed to the Portuguese by local kings who had converted to Catholicism, though such arrangements were often short-lived. There were also cases of voluntary submission, with Timor again serving as an example. Macau, on the other hand, emerged as a kind of merchant republic, granted by explicit permission of the Chinese authorities. Fundamentally, the Portuguese presence in the region relied on a peaceful trade operating in a densely populated area with well-established trade networks. Military pressure was frequently intertwined with commercial practices. While one might point to a favorable regional context, including the inward focus of major powers like China and Persia due to internal affairs, the fragmented political landscape of the Indian subcontinent, and the Portuguese ability to forge alliances and exploit divisions, it is hard to overlook the argument advanced by historians such as Charles Boxer and Carlos Cipolla. They emphasized that Portugal's maritime dominance largely stemmed from its ships being armed with artillery, the famed sails and cannons, a capability unmatched by other seafaring peoples in the Indian Ocean at the time. Many Portuguese fortresses were built on islands, like Goa, and their ships functioned to a great extent as floating fortresses. In truth, although the Portuguese maintained a trading post in Antwerp, the goods they brought from Europe were only partially sufficient to pay for the pepper and other spices they transported back to the continent. As a result, they were compelled to integrate into the Indian Ocean's existing trade networks and impose taxes on various trading hubs. For a time, they managed to secure an almost complete monopoly over maritime navigation through a system of licenses issued to private merchants known as cartazes. These licenses, initially signified by a flag and later as written documents, functioned essentially as safe conduct passes. The king equipped the official India-run ships, which made the round trip between Europe and Asia, reserving the majority of the ship's cargo space for himself. However, he allowed certain individuals, royal officials, soldiers, or even ordinary sailors, to use portions of the available cargo space for their own profit. Additionally, private individuals were permitted to outfit ships under royal license. The monsoon regime imposed strict schedules for departures and arrivals, though this discipline did not prevent the many shipwrecks caused by storms. These natural hazards, along with military conflicts and pirate attacks, made the India route especially perilous and contributed to the high death toll among those who traveled to Asia. Around 1540, one of the most renowned viceroys of India, Dom João de Castro, estimated that the total number of Portuguese in the Indian Ocean ranged between 6,000 and 7,000 men. Considering such limited manpower, the extent of both the formal and informal Portuguese presence across Asia is remarkable. They were, or soon would be, found in nearly every region. It is also important to note that many of these Portuguese operated independently, without approval from the Crown or its appointed authorities. In addition to trade, there was significant religious activity. much of it led by missionaries, many of them foreigners, who often acted autonomously in their evangelizing missions. Chief among these was Saint Francis Xavier, a Spaniard who arrived in Goa in 1542. Shortly thereafter, the Jesuit order to which he belonged overtook the Franciscans, Dominicans, and other religious groups in leading missionary efforts into areas previously unknown to Europeans. Nevertheless, while independent powers and unofficial initiatives played a crucial role in shaping the Portuguese presence in Asia, they coexisted with the centralized crown-led enterprise and its chain of command. This included various levels of involvement in commercial practices. The king's direct or indirect participation in these matters was frequently a source of contention, which intensified particularly in the mid-1500s, when signs of crisis began to emerge in the Portuguese Pepper Empire.